Hello, Facebook family. What is going on? We got a spicy one today. That's why I got Lucy here as my sidekick to make sure that she protects me from all the hate. She's my guard dog. And so she's here to protect me from all of the hate that's going to potentially come when a Middle Eastern man is going to be discussing something so trigger warning happy that I got my guard dog here with me to protect me against the hate that might be coming this way preemptively. It's funny. It's my name's, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Dr.Nima Rahmany. I'm going to give a moment for some peeps to jump on. I am a chiropractor who, if you don't know who I am, I'm a chiropractor, and I have recently transitioned myself out of chiropractic, and I help professionals and executives and leaders, inspiring leaders in transitional anxiety from career and personal life, become powerfully aligned so that they can have the inner inspired leader emerge. And one of the things that keeps coming up when I do my sessions with my clients is the whole concept of sexual trauma. It comes up. You might be wondering, what's a chiropractor doing speaking about sexual trauma? That's just, it's not in your field of expertise, and I totally get it. But I really wanted to share this, as we've seen a lot of these Me Too posts coming up speaking about sexual trauma. And I have a few things that I really wanted to share, both from a personal standpoint and from a professional standpoint, because I now make my living helping people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, and invariably whenever we do our sessions and we either in workshops or somewhere around, hey, what's up, Willow? Whether it's in workshops or whether we are in my Powerfully Aligned Mastermind program, what's blocking them from living their most inspired lives is a past sexual trauma. And so one of the things that we get to do together in the process is to unpack it and reframe it and change the story, both in the beliefs and the unconscious mind, which is the body. And so, hey, Dave from Oklahoma, please let me know where you're signing in from, because if I have engagement with you, then I know that, I'm either striking a nerve, or you get me, you give me one of these, or you tap the angry button if I've made you angry. All I ask is for your engagement. This is a very important topic and a very important conversation. Clearly, you can see it's gained a lot of traction in social media, because your Facebook feed is filled with people messaging little personal messages of Me Too. And I saw this one today that was highly charged. It was basically, and this is a gal that I know, going into great detail about the evening which it all happened. And you can see that it was a sexual abuse situation. And so my heart goes out to you, to anyone who has been the experience, the prey of a predator in that situation where you have experienced sexual trauma. This is not something that I condone. This is not something that I encourage. This is not something that, as a healthcare practitioner, we say, yay, it's a great idea. And many of you, as I'm about to share what I'm about to share, are going to take what I'm saying as a justification for abuse. Please understand, this is not what I'm saying. And I'm also quite concerned of this with you, realizing that who I am as a Persian male could trigger you speaking about something that you feel that I have no right to talk about because I'm a man. So why do I have a right? And the words victim blaming and all of that have come up in a lot of my conversations when I share with people, or when I'm speaking around the world. People in the audience or people on my Facebook lives will call what I'm saying toxic and harmful and abusive and all of that. And who am I? I've done sessions with post-traumatic stress disorder veterans of the Iraq War, forgetting that my face, everything looks like the enemy. And so sitting across and seeing their reaction to seeing me when they first saw me, I realized that the messenger himself might be blocking you from being able to see the truth of the message. And I hope that that's not the case, but realistically that, I get that that's going to be happening at times. So I really want to share that. And the first thing that I want to do is to point you up to this movie that I saw just yesterday on Netflix, and it's called Accidental Courtesy. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is this black man who's a rock and roll musician. He basically goes out and interviews KKK, Ku Klux Klan members, racists, like hardcore racists. What he does is he goes and sits down with them and starts questioning them, asking them a bunch of questions. Why did you become where you became? Where did you come from? What was your history? And he took down his judgment and his hate, and he took down all of the the abuse that goes back and forth between Black Lives Matter, white, black, all of that hate that gets thrown back and forth. He took it off, and he basically just said, all right, I want to hear from you. Why are you so hateful towards Black people? Like, tell me your story. And what he did was nothing short of miraculous. It's called Accidental Courtesy, and you gotta watch this. And what it did was, as I watched that last night, it just made me realize that this whole Me Too concept, this whole, take the whole racist thing away and put the racists away. And now that racist concept, now let's go to sexual abusers concept. And it got me thinking, what if we were to take the same principles this man did? By the way, this man, I forget his name, Accidental Courtesy. Please look it up. Please watch this. It's a documentary. What he did by reaching out to these KKK members and befriending them and telling them and saying, please tell me your story, why you feel this way, without judging them and making them wrong, what he discovered was they all had a story. And as he allowed them to vent their story, those people turned around and said, well, we would like to know what it's been like for you. And as he shared, went back and forth, I think there was about, over the years, he had 21 or 25 Ku Klux Klan members renounce their participation in the KKK and totally became loving human beings as a result. And I thought to myself, okay, the way we're shaming people because of their past, because of what they did or didn't do, or victimizing ourselves, I'm wondering if that's what's doing if that's really what's helping us. And what I've observed is this, in working with people, many people, both myself and Amanda, who's also experienced sexual trauma in her past. I'm happy to have her join me and share her story as well. What we do in our work as part of facilitators of transformation is really have healing in mind, okay? So we can't continue this conversation if we don't first identify what's the true outcome that we would love to achieve here. And I think you and I can both agree that healing and transformation is our number one goal. And if healing and transformation within ourselves and within society, if that's really what our goal is, then let's take a moment and stop and look at the neurophysiology of what happens with healing. And by me going back to past events and regurgitating them and writing them out without a plan of attack, of transforming it, and actually without a guide walking with you, without a safe place to vent, so that you have somebody trained to walk you through that experience, just venting it out and blurting it. And every time you repeat it, the thoughts that you have, the thoughts of, I am powerless, I am no good, I'm violated, I'm a piece of whatever, because I went through that, by constantly repeating it to people and mentioning, and then all of a sudden, getting all of this support around you, which is usually why we do it. I'm going to talk about support groups in a moment, doesn't actually promote your healing. It actually makes it worse. I'm not saying to repress here. Please understand, I'm not saying to repress. By constantly repeating your victim story of suffering, we are creating neurophysiological responses in our body that create the stress response and drive us further into adaptation, further into our breakdown. Okay? Now, if we continue to do that in an environment, what we're doing is we're seeking support. You know, you see, oh, hun, thank you. And what that does, when you get support from people around you, that feels really good. You get an instant hit of dopamine. So in your neurophysiology, you pick yourself up from that disempowered state. But the problem is chronic, constant support will keep you stuck, will keep us stuck. It is only through challenge and through pushing through challenge and seeing how it served you is where your transcendence and healing actually occur. This quote came to me in a dream. It was, the highest form of forgiveness is the authentic recognition that everything served you and that there is nothing to forgive. I'm going to repeat that because many of the people who are really wounded from their past still believe that forgiveness, I'll see their memes of love and honor and forgiveness, yet, but not in that situation, not when that person did that to me. And what I discovered is that the highest form of forgiveness is the authentic recognition that everything served you and there is nothing to forgive. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy. I am saying that if you want to truly heal and feel whole and complete, we need to go further than that shitty first draft of you sharing your victim story, sharing the story of what happened in the past. And I know because I work with people who are trauma survivors. And once you can take the label of survivors to thrivers, like people like Oprah Winfrey, people like, you know, Richard Simmons, and all of the people who've made like I hate to use those two. I hate to use those two in the same breath, but I'm just people who've come to mind, people who've come to mind in your, people you admire, I guarantee you have had a past that has had some sort of a sexual trauma. It is, first of all, from the posts that you can see, I think you can agree that it is great that we're having this conversation. The purpose of sharing the Me Too posts, which opens up dialogue, and it makes people, especially those who've been repressing it, who haven't been sharing that, and who feel that they are alone, who feel that they're too ashamed to speak up and say what they've gone through. For those people, it's huge. This is incredible because we're now talking about something that many people just don't feel comfortable talking about, or they want to shame and repress it. And that in itself creates stored illness in the body, and that traps your emotions and then creates all sorts of illness. I've seen it as a chiropractic practitioner for 16 years, which is why I got into the work that I've got into. And the problem is that when we just stop there, when we express it and we stop there without the proper tools, without the proper guidance to move past that victim story, expressing it is a first step. Without having the tools to get to the next level, what ends up happening is we now start the victim blame. We now start the shaming. We now start playing that victim role, recreating the steps in that neurophysiology that promotes illness, and we don't have a bigger understanding of the big picture. And I'd like to share a little bit of a perspective of the bigger picture of this whole oppressed and the oppressor, the bully and the bullied, this whole dynamic equilibrium, this whole dance that occurs between the victim and the oppressor, that without a firm understanding in it in your life, you could end up playing this stuck role, thinking that you're going to get your power by calling out, you know, the injustice, but not understanding that that's keeping you disempowered. So I'd love to share some of the notes that I've taken as I jotted down the perfect storm for this predator and prey cycle. And so what I'm hoping to do, what the intention is to inspire actual healing rather than blocking what's available in healing by disconnecting you from the entire event, disconnecting your role in it as far as the predator-prey dance. And I'd love to share that with you. Because what I'm hoping is that this can inspire dialogue, much like the show, The Accidental Courtesy, which this man goes and meets up with racists and says, what was it like for you? And then just by the virtue of love, just by the virtue of taking off the mask and not making wrong and understanding, he empowered himself to take away his victimhood, and he empowered the other person to stop his fear. Healing happened through love. And I submit, this is going to sound weird coming from a healthcare practitioner, but the only way that you're going to be able to heal this cycle and break this cycle is through love. Because the more that if you don't get this right, and I'm going to share with you this understanding, if you don't get this right, what happens is that stored trauma in your body and that resentment, it builds up this emotional charge that sounds weird, but I've seen it over and over again. It draws and magnetizes more of that predator-prey dance into your life. And if it's not in your life, it actually comes out as in your children, unfortunately. This is what I've seen. In other words, if you have a story about your bullying, you were bullied in your past and you haven't gotten whole and complete with you getting bullied, then chances are, and I've seen it in my clients, their children start getting bullied in school because whatever you haven't completed in your life and gotten whole and complete with, then your children are going to act it out. They energetically are there to help teach you as well. And the whole goal of it is to bring you into an awareness of that you can't run from your past challenges. You got to run into it and feel them again, and under a trained and capable coach, mentor, to walk you through that entire experience so that you can emerge empowered on the other side. So what causes a predator? We got to understand, in order to really heal your story, we have to get out of the victim stance of it and get into what I love to call overview and look at the entire dance and see yourself as a partner in the dance. So let's start by kind of understanding what goes on in the mind of a predator. Now, I can't paint everyone with the same brush. I'm just giving you examples, clinical examples of what I've seen in my practice, people in my Powerfully Aligned Mastermind program, clients of mine, people who come to my overview experience. I've seen hundreds of cases, and this is what we see. The way that you breed a predator, first and foremost, is to, number one, as a child, this predator, it could be female as well, by the way. It's not just males, it's females as well. First and foremost, never talk about sexuality. Make sexuality completely wrong. This is how you breed a predator. You basically make it wrong. It's bad, it's taboo, it's immoral. If you have sexual desires, then they're bad and they're shameful. And not only that, we're not allowed to speak about them. They're going to remain suppressed. So we basically suppress all of that normal kind of impulse that's within the body of a young man or a female, male or a female. We're not going to talk about it. We make it shameful and we make it wrong. Add to it, in this, usually what I'll see as patterns is this child kind of gets hurt or abused themselves or traumatized themselves. So they themselves at a certain age, whether it be age 3, age 4, age 12, they become disempowered in that moment. So that's why you ask the question, why does this happen to you? If you were 5, you were an innocent child or whatever, why does that happen then? Well, the perpetrator, even though they're an adult, they could actually be emotionally stuck in that state because they haven't themselves overcome their past traumas and hurts. So we're talking, hurt people, and it's not a conscious thing. It's an unconscious impulse. This is basically what oftentimes happens. So all of these Me Too, that where you're shaming that individual for doing something that basically it wasn't oftentimes a conscious thing. It's not actually perpetuating healing of that person. The shameful acts actually drive us into the shameful feelings. That little dark passenger that gets triggered actually drives us into moving further and further into that state. Why? Because it's disempowerment that causes a 16-year-old boy to touch on a 6-year-old little girl. Often in family dynamics, you often see this with a cousin. an uncle, a father. I mean, first of all, I hope we can see the magnitude of this challenge. It's a pandemic. It's a pandemic. It's pandemic. I think the numbers are like at least 75% of women have been assaulted or, in some form throughout their lives. I mean, I would say it's even further. I would say it's even more. But the question is why? The question is why. It's wiser to ask why. We can make fire wrong. I can say, oh, fire is so terrible. Curse fire. Fire is wrong and it shouldn't have never happened. Yeah, okay, great. How's that working so far? It's wiser for me to study fire. It's wiser for me to look at the ideal conditions for fire to emerge so that I can have power and choice in things not going into flames. By me pointing fingers and blaming fire takes away my responsibility of creating an environment and condition internally and externally so that fire doesn't happen. The same thing works for racism. The same thing works for abuse. This is how it goes. By the way, thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the acknowledgement. Please, if you know somebody that really needs to hear this, this is very critical stuff. I've become very aware of how this type of work, this emotional work that I've transitioned into from the structural is critical, because consider that if you don't get this whole thing right, it's blocking your worthiness to be able to step up in your career. Or if you don't have this right and you are if you're still living in a victim stance because of something that's happened in the past, because you can't get past it, you're stuck. It's like completely like blocking you. Well, guess what? It's blocking and messing up your current relationships. And when you get this right, freedom is on the other side and healing is on the other side. It's not that you're wrong for feeling like the victim. That's not the case at all. This is the first step. You get that support until you realize it's time to transcend that and to turn that forgiveness into I forgive you into gratitude and power and freedom. This is what's available. So how to breed a predator. Number one, you don't talk about sexuality. Number two, they have this culture of disempowerment. They're completely disempowered or they're abused as a child. And then here's what happens. The third case, and this is what we see. You have a younger individual, okay, who is completely putting you on a pedestal, putting them on a pedestal, and oftentimes there's a shutdown in the sexuality of their partner. So this younger child or whatever puts that person on a pedestal, or if it's a date rape situation, which I've seen over and over again, you have the story of, I really wanted him to like me. I really, really wanted to be beautiful. I really wanted to be, to be wanted and accepted and desired. So you have this huge discrepancy between the empowerment of that individual with a disempowered younger person, usually female, who totally pedestalizes and puts that other person kind of like godlike, their approval on a huge pedestal. And that is part of the recipe for this predator-prey interaction. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying these are the conditions, so that once we understand the conditions, we now have a choice. So I wanted to share with you what causes the prey, how to breed the prey. First and foremost, usually I don't mean to paint this all with one big brush, because it happens with both. It happens both men and women. In fact, I look back when I was 16, I was involved in a situation with an older, was I 16? He was 16. I was 8 years old. And I got into a situation where this guy who was in our neighborhood, I really had him on a pedestal. It wasn't sexual. I was 8 years old at the time. But he started acting out some fantasies and I wanted to be liked. And I found myself in a situation where I was completely vulnerable. And then taken advantage of, and I was standing there kind of in a fight or flight or freeze mode, and I didn't know what to do, and I was touched, and I was, asked to do certain things, and I just wanted to be liked in that moment. And before I even knew it, I was like, what the heck just happened? And it was a really traumatic time for me. I spent like months like beating myself up and all of this situation. And what I discovered was that, by the way, this is the first time I've ever said this publicly, so I'm saying this in a Facebook Live. Realizing back then, and all the shame and all of that, is that what created that discrepancy was that huge pedestalization, where I didn't actually have my power in that moment. But what that did was that actually forced me into looking at myself and growth, and forced me into wisdom that I absolutely am grateful for at this moment. But what breeds the prey, number one, is you've got to have a high value on sexuality, on being liked, on being desired, on being pretty, on being attractive. And we have this high value on sexuality with girls at a very young age, boys too. It happens, boys too. So what do? We got to look hot. We got to dress as, and I'm not saying that it's the fault of the person. I'm talking about responsibility. I'm talking about looking at the perfect storm. You got high value on sexuality in precociousness as well, not fully understanding the responsibility and the empowerment involved. You basically have shame as well, because you haven't talked about it. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about desires, fantasies, all of that stuff. So we keep them bottled up and repressed. And then now we feel shame about that sexuality. And then number three, you have a high value on a guy's approval, and you got them on a pedestal. And now you have the perfect storm. The perfect storm for a predator-prey interaction. Now, we have two choices. Remember, my number one concern is healing. Choice number one is to make the entire thing wrong, make yourself wrong, make the oppressor, predator wrong, and live your entire life looking back and saying that it shouldn't have happened the way that it did. It was wrong. It was cruel. It was whatever, which I know that there's huge pain. I get to take people through really scary scenes of past trauma in the work that I do, that I get to do. Or the impact of holding on to that is that you live forever with this stored trauma, and it shows up with symptoms like anxiety, like depression, like insomnia, like shame sexually. Now, you'll even look, almost every single woman that I've ever worked with hormonal issues, with infertility issues, with some sort of endometriosis, there is some story of a past sexual trauma, infidelity, some conflict or incomplete with your sexuality will breed problems of the reproductive system. So this is one of your first red flags, that you're still holding on to a story with potential, that's potentially on the other side of it. What's available to you is freedom from that story. Freedom to the point where you can speak about it and share. I'm not saying to keep it silent at all, but in a way that others can be touched and moved and inspired by your transformation. Nobody is inspired by a story of poor me victimhood. Nobody is. You'll get a lot of support from other people who are still wounded from their past, but from others who've experienced it and transcended it, you'll get a private message saying, I get where you are, I've been where you are, and there's freedom on the other side. That's where healing is. That's what I'm taking this big risk to share with you. Being a man, Middle Eastern guy who probably looks like the enemy to you, if you truly knew where I was coming from, is that what's available to you when you look at the big picture and see that you yourself can have freedom from that experience, so that when you're sharing your Me Too story, it's done not in a way of poor me and that asshole. It's done in a state of compassion for that asshole, predator, we'll call him or her, that that predator was actually acting from a place of immaturity and hurt and trauma themselves. And the only way that we can change this entire dialogue is from a grassroots level. Both predator and prey start to do the necessary work it takes to own up to their part of the responsibility, to stepping up past their stories from their past, so that they can actually make their story, change the story, and then inspire somebody else in their healing. Because God knows we need it. Thank you for the love. I appreciate that. God knows we need that. We don't need more victims, because support groups going around in circles saying, me too, oh, me too, and then poor me in that situation does not heal. It actually makes things worse. It actually creates more separation. It comes from a total lack of understanding of both sides, and it stops us from actually healing and growing. And this is what I love to share with people. And we got to see this past weekend in the overview experience in Toronto, people overcoming their past stories. One person sharing their past sexual trauma with their father, who 1 year ago could not even remember it because she completely blocked it out, but spoke up in a way, not from a place of victimhood, but from a place of love. The answer to your trauma is actually love. And the highest form of forgiveness is the authentic recognition that everything served you and that there is nothing to forgive. And I'm not saying that it's easy, but this is the work that we do. If this is something, I mean, there's, you know, the impact of you not clearing it is that, I'll tell you right now, your stress energy, you know, it gets bound up in your body, and then it actually becomes this weird kind of magnet, beacon, as my friend Irene Lyon says, beacon, so you attract it more. You see it happening more, and you have this fear of it happening, and whatever you fear, you draw near until you learn how to transform it, and then all of a sudden you gain power over it. Because if you don't, chances are you're going to start seeing it. Tell me if you notice this. If you anything that you haven't yet completed and loved in your past, your children start acting it out. You start acting it in the kids. It starts showing up. The symptoms are, you know, breakdowns in all relationships, your inability to be real and authentic in your relationship because you're still holding on to something from your past you haven't learned to let go. And so here's what to do next. If this is something that you are dealing with or grappling with, and this is triggering you, I get it. It wasn't my intention, but because we're talking about such a triggering topic, it's bound to happen. Let me know in the comments. Send me a private message. Share this with people that you know that really need to hear this. I'm on a mission. I'm on a crusade with my company and the coaches that I work with and all the people that I'm working with. And my clients now are becoming part of this crusade to let other people know that their past does not have to define who they are. That by healing under the right guidance, under the right mentorship, we can take those past stories and actually turn them, these emotional scars, into your beauty marks. And from your, you know, instead of a victim to your history, as John DeMartini says, you get to be a master of your destiny. And it's through that experience that I went through when I was younger that I can honestly say I have really emerged as, you know, a powerhouse, you know, that woke me up to the areas of disempowerment. In fact, my clients will tell you that those cases of date rape and all of these things that they've gone through in their past, or past trauma from family members that either they themselves have done or they that have become the prey to, has actually caused them to grow into the most compassionate, caring leaders. And it's through those events that they can now turn and actually see from a different perspective and gain freedom from. And that's really what I want for you. I want freedom instead of that story. You know, who would you be without that story, as Byron Katie says? Who would you be without that story? I'll tell you who you'd be. You would be powerful. You'd be able to express yourself. You'd be able to have more conscious relationships and not fear and not have this trust issues, because now you trust yourself. And if this is something that inspires you, that you really want to look into it, please send me a private message. I'm going to be doing 2 coaching for 2 separate people a free coaching call for somebody who's experienced that in their past and they haven't been able to let it go. They haven't been able to forgive it. They're still running that story. They're seeing it over and over, or they fear that it's going to happen with their kids and they want to be able to gain the insights that it's going to take to be able to heal. Please send me a private message, or consider coming to our overview experience that's going to be in Vancouver, November 18th and 19th. Send me a private message. I'll do an application call with you, and tag somebody that you know needs to hear this. Or we're going to be in London, UK, somewhere in the world. We just came back from Australia 2 weeks ago. Last weekend in Toronto. We're going to be in Vancouver. And basically, over a weekend, you can learn how to clear that victim story, that past, so that you don't have to play victim anymore. You can actually be the master of your destiny. So basically, in a nutshell, it's really about understanding how the predator and the prey emerge. And when you can in order to understand that, it takes an overview perspective rather than the perspective of the victim. And what's available to you on the other side of that is power. One of the things that I hear constantly is that people experience a lack of power. They feel powerless in those moments. I take them back. When I regress them back to those moments of trauma, I ask them, okay, so what is it that you're feeling? They say they feel powerless. And I'm here to tell you that nothing is further from the truth. If you are making a story that those past events make you powerless, that is completely not true. The reason why we engage in that victim story, and we want to tell that story as much as possible, is because we are attempting to gain power when we don't know how to gain it for ourselves. And what brings you power is transcendence and love. The amount of power that you gain by loving an event rather than resenting it is available. It's uncommon. I know it's going to trigger many of you, but if you've experienced this type of work, please let me know or share that with somebody. And I'm here to tell you that it's possible for you. And this is what we do. This is what I do each and every weekend. I do the overview experience. Every call that I make with someone, invariably somebody who's got a past event that's holding them back, has a sexual trauma. And I'm here to share with you that freedom's on the other side. So has that served? Have you gained anything from this? Does this trigger you? Please engage with me. How do you feel about this conversation? Does this trigger you? Do you disagree? Have you gone through it in the past? Please let me know. Engage with me. Let me know some hearts, some love, some sadness, whatever it is. Express yourselves. You are free. You have a safe space to express. You can agree. You can disagree. It's not wrong. However way you feel isn't wrong. I've just been really fascinated in the world of what causes us to have certain feelings. Where do our feelings and traumas come from? They usually come from stories from our past. And once we turn those stories around, you can, within a matter of minutes, somebody can actually transform that past story and turn it into absolute gratitude and love, which is where the healing happens, which I do want to share with you guys. This movie, The Accidental Courtesy. This guy who goes in, black man who interviews KKK members, racists who hate him, interviews them and gives them a voice, and all of a sudden creates love and healing just by doing that. It's a phenomenal documentary that will move you to tears. It moved me to tears last night, which is what inspired this Facebook Live post. And hopefully, if this has been resonating with you, you want to reach out, send me a private message. And I'm offering 2 free coaching consultations with people who have been stuck in the past. Now, here's the catch. It's not for everyone. If you want to stay stuck with your story, then it's best not reach out to me. However, if you would love to not have that effect and you want to change the impact of that story into absolute love and freedom, then I would love for you to reach out to me. So if you want to be right and you want to stay stuck in that victim story, then please, this is not the call for you. But if you really want to transcend that and you're tired and you've seen the impact of that past story and you are stuck and you get it, you feel wounded, but you no longer want to have that resentment anymore, talk to this asshole and I will be happy to assist you in giving you a kind of a path of transformation that you can either take or leave. I might give you away some free golden nuggets in that call, but I do want to reach out to the right person, the right two people that are ready to transform their story. God bless you guys. Are there any questions? Does anyone have anything they would like to share? Yes. Thank you for the love. God bless. Lucy and I say mad love. There's nothing that anybody has to share. Please share this with somebody that you know needs to hear this. Tag them, and I would love to share and talk and discuss with them. And we'll see you at the next Perfect Time.